In the quiet halls of the Kremlin, a meeting took place on July 31, 2025, that would have been unimaginable just a year earlier. Syrian Foreign Minister Ahmad Al-Sharaa and Defense Minister Murhaf Abu Khazra sat across from Russian President Vladimir Putin. This was not a meeting between old friends but a cautious first step between former adversaries now bound by mutual necessity. For years, Russian jets had dominated Syrian skies in support of the now-fallen dictator Bashar al-Assad. Now, the very government that rose from the ashes of Assad's rule was in Moscow, seeking to redefine a relationship stained by a decade of conflict and bloodshed. It was, honestly, a clear signal to the world that Syria's new leadership was ready to engage even with those who had propped up their former oppressor. The symbolism of the visit was powerful and intentional. This was the first official delegation from Syria's new transitional government to visit Moscow since the dramatic collapse of the Assad regime in December 2024. The discussions were not about continuing the old alliance, but about forging a completely new one, built on different terms. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov extended a formal invitation to Syria's interim president, Ahmad Al-Sharaa, to attend a Russia-Arab League summit scheduled for October 15, 2025. This invitation was more than a polite gesture. It was Russia's acknowledgement of the new reality in Damascus, and its desire to remain a key player in the region, regardless of who holds power in Syria. The atmosphere of the meeting was described by insiders as professional and direct, a stark contrast to the deferential tone Assad's officials often took with their Russian patrons. The Syrian delegation came with a clear agenda and a set of firm demands, signaling that the era of Syrian subordination was over. They were there to discuss the future, not to dwell on the grievances of the past, though those grievances loomed large over the proceedings. The new Syrian leaders understood that to secure their country's future, they needed to manage their relationship with the powerful Russian bear that still maintained a significant military footprint on their soil. This bold diplomatic move was a testament to the pragmatic approach of President al-Shara's government. They recognized that while Russia was a major part of Syria's painful recent history, it could also be a necessary part of its future stability. The goal was to transform the relationship from one of dependency under Assad to one of partnership based on sovereign respect. By initiating these high-level talks, Syria was asserting its agency on the world stage, making it clear that the country was no longer a passive battleground for foreign powers, but an active participant in shaping its own destiny, even if it meant sitting down with a former foe. The decision by Syrian President Ahmad Al-Sharaa to pursue an alliance with Russia might seem puzzling, given Moscow's long and brutal support for the Assad regime. However, this move was rooted in a calculated, interest-based strategy that prioritizes national security and stability above all else. The new government has deliberately shifted away from a purely revolutionary mindset, which often rejects any compromise with former enemies, toward a more pragmatic approach to foreign policy. They understand that in the complex world of international relations, permanent enemies are a luxury a fragile state cannot afford. The primary goal is to protect Syria from ongoing external threats, particularly the frequent and damaging airstrikes conducted by Israel. Russia's continued military presence in Syria is a central piece of this strategic puzzle. Moscow controls the Tartus naval base and the Hamaimim air base, giving it significant leverage not only in Syria but across the entire Mediterranean. Instead of viewing these bases solely as a threatening remnant of the old regime, al-Sharaa's government saw them as a powerful bargaining chip. By offering to let Russia keep its strategic foothold, Syria could negotiate from a position of relative strength. This pragmatic view recognizes that Russia needs Syria for its global military posture just as much as Syria needs a powerful ally to help guarantee its sovereignty and deter foreign aggression. Furthermore, Russia's role on the United Nations Security Council cannot be ignored. With its veto power, Moscow can block international resolutions that might harm Syria's interests or shield it from unwanted foreign intervention. For Syria's new leaders, securing Russia's cooperation at the UN is essential for rebuilding the nation on its own terms, and ensuring its territorial integrity is respected by the global community. Many in the new government see this diplomatic engagement as a necessary evil, a practical step required to navigate the treacherous geopolitical landscape of the Middle East and secure a stable, unified future for the country after years of devastating civil war. This strategic pivot is also about re-establishing Syria's place in the world. After a decade of being treated as a pariah state under Assad, the new government is eager to form diverse alliances that can help it rebuild and modernize. By engaging with a global power like Russia, Syria signals that it is open for business and ready to re-enter the international community as a sovereign and independent nation. The ultimate objective is clear: to use every available tool, including diplomacy with former adversaries, to ensure Syria's survival and reconstruction, transforming a painful past into a foundation for a more secure and prosperous future for all its people. When the Syrian delegation arrived in Moscow, they did not come with empty hands or a humble attitude. They presented a clear and firm list of conditions for any new alliance, making it plain that the relationship would be one of equals. At the very top of their list was the issue of justice for the crimes of the former regime. Syria demanded Russia's full cooperation in prosecuting Bashar al-Assad, who had found refuge in Moscow. The Syrian proposal was bold and specific. Assad should face an international trial at The Hague for the atrocities committed under his rule. This demand was not just about revenge, it was about establishing a new moral foundation for the country, based on accountability and the rule of law. Another major condition was a complete review and renegotiation of all agreements signed between Russia and the Assad regime. This included approximately 40 deals, most notably those made during Assad's 2020 visit to Moscow, which granted Russia extensive rights to Syria's oil, gas, and phosphate mineral resources. The new government argued that these agreements were exploitative and did not serve the interests of the Syrian people. They insisted on new terms that would ensure Syria retains control over its own natural wealth, using it to fund national reconstruction rather than enriching foreign powers. This was a direct challenge to the economic arrangements that had defined the old alliance. Protecting Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity was another non-negotiable demand. The Syrian delegation insisted that Russia use its considerable influence to put an end to Israeli airstrikes on Syrian territory, which had continued even after the fall of Assad. They also demanded Russian support for ensuring that the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, remain an integral part of a unified Syria, rejecting any possibility of separation or federalism that could lead to the country's fragmentation. This condition aimed to restore full government control over all Syrian land, and reassert the nation's strength and unity after years of division and foreign interference. Finally, Syria sought Russia's assistance in rebuilding its shattered military. The Syrian army, historically equipped with Soviet and Russian hardware, was in desperate need of modernization and rearmament to defend the country's borders effectively. However, this support was framed not as a plea for help, but as a necessary component of a balanced security partnership. In exchange for allowing Russia to maintain its strategic bases, Syria expected Moscow to provide the technology, training, and equipment needed to create a strong professional armed force capable of protecting the nation. These conditions collectively painted a picture of a new Syria self-assured, sovereign, and determined to dictate its own future. Russia, while open to a new relationship, came to the negotiating table with its own set of critical demands. Moscow's primary and most important condition was the uninterrupted continuation of its military presence in Syria. The Tartus naval facility and the Hmeimim airbase are not just symbols of Russian influence, they are essential pillars of its global military strategy. These bases provide Russia with its only direct access to the Mediterranean Sea, projecting its power into Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. For President Putin, securing a long-term agreement that guarantees Russian access to these strategic assets was the absolute top priority, and he was willing to make significant concessions in other areas to ensure this outcome. Beyond its military interests, Russia also expressed deep concerns about the future stability of Syria and the rights of its diverse population. President Putin demanded a firm guarantee from President al-Shara's government that it would protect Syria's religious and ethnic minorities, including Christians, Alawites, and Druze. Moscow feared that the fall of Assad could lead to sectarian violence, or the rise of extremist groups that could destabilize the entire region and threaten Russian interests. By positioning itself as a protector of minorities, Russia sought to maintain its role as a key arbiter of Syrian politics, and ensure that the new government would be inclusive and moderate. Another key Russian demand focused on the political future of the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF. While Syria wanted to ensure the SDF remained part of a unified country, Russia pushed for their formal integration into Syria's political system. Moscow proposed that the SDF be allowed to participate in future national elections and have a recognized voice in the government. This position was strategic, as Russia has maintained relationships with the Kurds and sees their inclusion as a way to prevent future conflict and avoid a power vacuum in northeastern Syria that other regional powers like Turkey or the United States might try to exploit. Finally, on the economic front, Russia offered its assistance in Syria's massive reconstruction efforts. However, this offer came with strings attached, as Russia expected its companies to play a leading role in rebuilding the country's infrastructure. When Syria rejected this and instead demanded $400 billion in war reparations for damages caused by Russian airstrikes, negotiations became more complex. In response, Russia made a counteroffer. It would forgive a significant portion of Syria's $23 billion debt and use its diplomatic channels to help unfreeze Syrian assets held in foreign banks. This economic package was designed to provide Syria with immediate financial relief, while avoiding any admission of guilt for its role in the war. The fate of Bashar al-Assad emerged as one of the most difficult and emotionally charged issues during the negotiations between Syria and Russia. For the new Syrian government, holding Assad accountable for war crimes was a matter of national justice and a core promise to its people. Their demand was unequivocal. Russia must cooperate in extraditing Assad to face an international tribunal, preferably at The Hague. This was more than a political move. It was a moral imperative for a nation seeking to heal from the trauma of a brutal civil war that killed over 500,000 people and displaced millions more. The Syrian delegation argued that true reconciliation could not begin until justice was served. President Vladimir Putin, however, met this demand with a firm and immediate rejection. Handing over a former ally to an international court would be seen as a sign of weakness and a betrayal that could undermine Russia's credibility with its other partners around the world. Putin made it clear that while Assad's political career was over, his personal safety was under Russian protection. Moscow viewed providing refuge to deposed leaders as a long-standing practice of powerful nations, and it was not prepared to set a new precedent. This fundamental disagreement created a significant roadblock in the talks, threatening to derail the entire effort to build a new alliance. In an attempt to find a middle ground, Russia presented a counterproposal. Instead of a trial, Moscow offered to grant Assad humanitarian asylum under strict conditions. According to this offer, Assad would be permanently removed from public and political life, effectively silencing him and ensuring he could never again interfere in Syrian affairs. Russia portrayed this as a pragmatic solution that would achieve Syria's goal of neutralizing Assad as a political threat while allowing Moscow to uphold its principle of protecting him. It was a classic diplomatic compromise, designed to satisfy the practical needs of both sides without forcing either to abandon its core principles entirely. Syria's new government, however, was not satisfied with this offer and immediately rejected it. They argued that humanitarian asylum for a man accused of mass atrocities was a euphemism for impunity and would be seen as a deep betrayal by the Syrian people. While they stood firm on their demand for a trial, they also showed some flexibility. When Russia refused to hand Assad over directly, Syria proposed that an international tribunal could be an option that Russia would not have to formally endorse but simply not obstruct at the UN Security Council. Russia neither accepted nor rejected this idea, leaving the door open for future negotiations on this critical and unresolved issue. Inside Syria, public opinion on the new government's engagement with Russia is deeply and painfully divided. For a large part of the population, the memory of Russian intervention is fresh and raw. They remember the years of relentless airstrikes that targeted not just military positions but also cities, markets, and hospitals. These attacks, carried out in support of the Assad regime, resulted in immense civilian casualties and contributed to the displacement of millions. For these Syrians, seeing their new leaders shake hands with Vladimir Putin feels like a betrayal of the revolution's ideals. They view Russia not as a potential partner but as an accomplice to the crimes they fought so hard to end. This resentment is fueled by personal loss and the visible scars of war that mark every Syrian city. Many families lost loved ones in Russian bombing raids, and the idea of forgiving, let alone allying with, Moscow is unthinkable. Online forums and social media channels are filled with angry debates, where critics accuse the al-Sharaa government of prioritizing cold political calculus over justice for the victims. They argue that any deal with Russia legitimizes its past actions and sacrifices the moral high ground that the opposition fought for. This segment of the population believes that true sovereignty can only be achieved by completely severing ties with all powers that participated in the destruction of their country. On the other side of the debate, however, is a growing number of Syrians who support the government's pragmatic approach. This group, while not forgetting Russia's role in the war, believes that engaging with Moscow is a political necessity for the country's survival and recovery. They point to Russia's military presence on their soil and its powerful veto at the UN Security Council as undeniable realities that cannot be ignored. From their perspective, negotiating with Russia is not a sign of weakness, but a mark of strategic maturity. They argue that it is the only realistic path to stopping Israeli airstrikes, unifying the country, and securing a stable future. This pragmatic viewpoint is often held by those who are most desperate for a return to normalcy. After more than a decade of war, their primary desire is for peace, stability, and economic reconstruction. They see the alliance with Russia as a means to an end, a way to leverage Moscow's power to protect Syrian interests and begin the long and difficult process of rebuilding. For them, the government's ability to secure concessions from Russia, such as renegotiating economic deals and getting support for the army, is proof that this strategy is working. They believe that for Syria to stand on its own 2 feet, it must be willing to make difficult choices, even if it means dealing with the ghosts of the past. The complex negotiations between Syria's new government and Russia serve as a powerful real-world lesson in the nature of international relations. They demonstrate a fundamental principle. In the high-stakes arena of global politics, decisions are rarely driven by emotions, historical grievances, or moral ideals. Instead, they are almost always guided by a cold, hard calculation of national interests. Syria's leaders, despite representing a revolution born from suffering caused in part by Russian bombs, chose to engage with Moscow because they determined it was the most practical way to secure their nation's future. They prioritized stability, sovereignty, and reconstruction over the emotional desire for retribution. This pragmatic approach is a hallmark of statecraft. President al-Sharaa's government understood that Russia's military bases, its UN veto, and its regional influence were facts on the ground that could either be a threat or a tool. By choosing to treat them as a tool, they transformed a position of weakness into one of leverage. They offered Russia what it wanted most: continued access to its strategic military assets, in exchange for what Syria needed most: security from external attacks, support for national unity, and a chance to rebuild its army. This transactional relationship, though devoid of warmth or trust, is often the foundation upon which international stability is built. Similarly, Russia's actions were dictated by its own strategic imperatives. Moscow's decision to engage with its former adversaries' successors was not born from a change of heart, but from a clear-eyed assessment of its own interests. Protecting its Mediterranean bases was paramount, as was maintaining its status as a major power broker in the Middle East. By quickly adapting to the new reality in Damascus, Russia ensured it would not be sidelined. Its offers to protect minorities and help with reconstruction were not just benevolent gestures, they were strategic moves designed to secure its long-term influence in a post-Assad Syria. Ultimately, the evolving relationship between Syria and Russia highlights that for nations, there are no permanent friends or permanent enemies, only permanent interests. The new Syrian government's bold diplomacy shows that even after a brutal conflict, former foes can find common ground when their strategic goals align. While the Syrian people remain divided and issues like justice for Assad are far from resolved, their leaders have made a choice to navigate the world as it is, not as they wish it to be. In doing so, they provide a clear example that in the quest for survival and stability, pragmatism often outweighs passion.